welcome William Finnegan, Alexandra Fuller, Mishna, Wolff, with our moderator, Rebecca Mead.
That was quite the voice, wasn't
Yes.
it? Woo!
And there's water here. I brought my own, but
Got in the machine.
I have a backup water.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to listen to our illustrious panelists talk about memoir. This is such an amazing space. I may be distracted by gazing off into the distance and looking at the mountains. I wanted to start with something that Bill wrote towards the end of your book. You tell an anecdote where you're talking with Barack Obama and you're kidding with him about him not being able to guess what middle school you went to, or something like this. This is Barack Obama in 2004, when only you know who he is. But you make a reference there in that passage to the fact that when you were in middle school, what was happening there was off the record. Nobody that you were at middle school with knew that you would end up writing about them, and you didn't know it yourself. And you, like me, are a writer for The New Yorker, where we live and die by reporting and facts and things being on the record. So I wanted to ask you to begin, but I also want to ask our other panelists to talk about that question of writing about lives and history that was just happening, that you weren't reporting.
Yeah. This reference to Obama was the single name drop in this whole book.
I was impressed.
Well, actually, nobody's ever mentioned it before. I've like leafed through the book and said, did they cut that? I thought someone would. Because it was actually, it comes in a funny context near the end of the book where I'm kind of discussing the ethics of memoir and writing about people having said things that were, in private life or off the record, so to speak. And somehow I twist it so I can drop Obama's name. and he...
Well done.
And he, sort of after hours, I was writing a profile of him, and we were relaxing in the evening, and I made fun of the high school he went to, which was the prep school in Honolulu. And he said, what? Like I'd use sort of crude terms to describe his school. What do you know about it? And he said, where did you go to school? And I told him, Kaimaki Intermediate, which to readers of the book means something because that's where the book opens, at Kaimaki Intermediate School in Honolulu. And he says, no fucking way. But I quote him something else. I say, he didn't actually say, I was playing with what was on the record, what was off the record. It was just funny to get Obama to curse. And so I wanted to include this little bit, but it was a discussion saying, this is my life now, where things are on the record and off the record. But what I've been doing for hundreds of pages here is private life, is a discussion of that. And it's true, I come at it as a journalist, and therefore am uneasy with the whole arrogation, of rights. That I should decide I'm going to tell these stories, even though we had no agreement, and I don't own this experience in a way that precludes the input of these other people. So I ended up going back and trying to find people that I'd lost touch with, old friends, enemies, frenemies, all these people, and not finding all of them, and having lots of different memories and negotiations therein. And it's that little anecdote toward the end. I was trying to dramatize a little bit the process, a little bit meta, of putting together a book like this one, a memoir, especially, as I say, memoir is such a weird genre for a journalist. That was my point.
But you actually went back and sort of tried to report as if
Yes.
you were...
Well, it's just so
writing.
weird. You're like reporting out your own past. Right. This reminds me, actually, I grew up in Southern California, and being here reminds me of when I was a kid, we used to have this expression, sort of a comeback we would use to adults who might be taking us to task, like, you know, what the hell did you think you were doing in Tijuana? And hey, I was researching my autobiography, which in my case turned out to be true.
Alexandra, I read an interview in which somebody asked you whether you worried about traumatizing your children and loved ones by writing about them, and you said, it's much more traumatic to live with me. I'm not so worried about traumatizing them on the page. So I wonder what thought you've given to this question of putting things in a book on the record that were just happening in the lives of yourself and those around you.
So I am not right-wing at all, but my mum is right of Attila the Hun. I mean, she voted for Ian Smith. I was like, how could you vote for Ian Smith 3 times? She said, there's no one more right-wing than him. And by the time I was 14, my mother
not at that time.
Yeah, at that time. Well, things have changed. But back then, and when I was growing up, I had this incredibly beautiful sister. My mother God knows. Anyway, I got taken off to a hairdresser in Blantyre for a haircut. And she said, I've never cut a Caucasian's hair before. My mom said, it's the first time for everything. So I had this terribly butchered haircut, hand-me-down clothes, and I got shoved into a posh boarding school in Harare, and I thought my only way of surviving this was to become a socialist, avowed. You know, put scarves in my hair, looked like I meant to wear second-hand clothes, have a Bolshevik attitude. My mother goes, rubbish, proper socialists don't wear linen, and they certainly aren't my children, and I mean, this whole thing. But the thing is that having grown up in the way that I did with these very, you know, these parents who supported white supremacy and who my mother, I mean, she couldn't wait to hop into uniform. She did not need to be conscripted. And you couldn't get that. If you showed up and said, you know what, I'm a lefty, and I just want to come and live with you guys for 18 years and take notes, obviously they would kill you. And they tried. I mean, trust me, my parents gave it their best shot. My father regretted educating me on these grounds. He was like, you know, if I'd known you were going to do something with all that reading and writing we gave you, I would have insisted you stay at home. So in a way, the way I look at it is, I always say to people who are very right-wing, you should be careful, you should really consider when you get invented. You know, I think my plan B, if this career fails, is to be a counselor at very conservative weddings, and the young couple, I can say to them, look, here's the thing, I think you should interview me before you procreate, because I am a possible outcome.
So you
Unless you want this memoir written about you. I mean, you know, and also I came of age, which you're going to appreciate this, but at that time when black women were starting to speak for the first time, and the courage it took to come out from hundreds of years of oppression for women to start speaking out. And so for me, the authority to hear someone like Bessie Head say, I have the authority from life to write what it is. Wow, that just took the shackles off me. I don't need permission. You know, and that is the problem, is the dominant narrative insists, no, you're incorrect, and your family system insists, no, you're incorrect, you're in some terrible trance. And I think if you're the writer in the family, you occupy 3 different places. You're victim, you're victimizer, you're voyeur. And you're hopping around in all 3 places. Eventually, hopefully, you get skilled enough that you step out of that dynamic and can write from a place of sort of deeper truth and universality. But until you get there, it's a messy shit show.
You're sort of embedded.
Absolutely, and I think that was a great thing. Also, you know, I mean, I should just come with a warning. Really, I'm a writer. You married me, you said yes to a lot, you know.
Mishna, you, well, the victim, the victimizer, and the, what was the third?
Voyeur.
The voyeur. You wrote at the beginning of your book a sort of author's note in which you talked about the truth that you rendered on the page is the truth as you remembered it then, not necessarily as you know it to be now.
Yeah, but it's true. It's all true.
Can you talk about the difference between those 2 things? What's the slippage there?
Well, you know, the thing is like, as you live a life, you get more perspective on the events of your life, and there's no stopping it. The perspective I have on my life today is even grown from the perspective I had on my life 7 years ago when I wrote this book. So, and I think that's the sort of lens through which a memoir is written. It's your perspective at that moment, and there's no keeping your perspective out of it. I mean, especially when you talk, my memoir's very voice-based. So point of view is a huge part of the way I write and my writing style and my memoir and everything else I write. So what I write can't be divorced from my point of view today. And my point of view is not my sister's or my dad's or my stepmother's or anyone else's in my family. And I did write about my family. But I will say, like, I did double check it with my my sister, and there was a lot of like going back and forth with people. Will you read this? I'm not saying I will change it if you disagree with me, but I'm fully willing to have the discussion, and I want to hear what your recollection is of this, because they're very young memories too for me. And I was worried. I wasn't worried about it. My publisher was like so worried about this stuff. And my family was so supportive of me in a way that in and of itself was an affirmation even before we got to the story. Just having my sister say, this is just how, this is it. It was just very affirming for me, because writing from your childhood place, you're writing about a time when you were powerless, and to have someone say that this is what happened to you, I was there, is affirming.
Oh my God, that's awesome. My family denied me completely. My mother said I was switched at birth and did the whole thing to get on the Oprah Springer show.
Did she get on Oprah?
Oh, she thinks that's why I did it.
Oh, right, yeah. right, yeah.
Obvi. So I'll get hugged.
Yeah, that was not my experience. I realized that it was a very lucky experience. But not to go on, but I also think the publishers play a major role in what happens to your memoir after it's written. Mine at least had me, for example, there was a character in my book called New York Ron. New York Ron sold cocaine. And my publisher was like, he lived across the street from us, he sold cocaine. My publisher was like, you gotta take that out. I was like, excuse me? The lawyer's like, you gotta take it out. You can't say this person sold cocaine. I said, he has a criminal record. It would be slander if I said New York Ron sold the worst cocaine. But they insisted. There were like these little details that I remember they had me change or take out, just so that they could just sort of avoid, things being so on the nose that characters would be recognizable and sue them. And when you're writing from memory, you're trying to write truthful characters that people will recognize as that, because it's that exact person. So that was part of my process too. It was that moment.
Alexandra, you wrote 9 novels before you wrote your memoir.
Spectacular failures.
Oh, it's almost unbearable to think of all those pages produced.
You know what? It's that whole however many rules. I could have got a PhD, or I could sit there and write 9 crappy novels and learn from the rejection letters. So I did that.
And your editor, no, not even your editor, your agent after the 8th said, or when you presented her, I think it's her, with the 9th said, you've got some skills, but you don't have a story.
Right.
So was it then that you thought, well, I do have a story, it's my family's story, and in a sense, why had that not occurred to you earlier?
Because
to write this in this genre?
But I think this is the experience of everyone growing up. You don't think this is extraordinary. It just is what is. And I was quite young. I was 29 when I wrote it, and I was very much in, my mother drinks a lot, and she knows how to handle a gun. I was not going to write about her. If there was any way I could fictionalize this thing, that was going to be my route. So it was just, you have to be pushed to the brink to go to the bone.
And the brink was being told
You're done.
You
Yeah.
can't write fiction.
Yeah.
But you knew you were a writer. You had to write.
Yeah, you know, honestly, it was for my kids. I thought, you know what, I'm going to tell them what this is like, but there's no way living in Wyoming they're going to know any of this, and they're going to grow up and be ungrateful little American, you know. And I want them to know, actually, when I threaten to take them to a soup kitchen in Zambia, well, I loll by the pool with a gin and tonic when they're badly behaved, I mean it. I am like my mother. And when the only affirmation I got from my family was when my daughter turned 18, I finally was brave enough to be like, look, here are the 8 rules of surviving your grandparents. Don't break a single one of them. Go out, good luck. Like, I love you, hope I see you again. So she goes out to stay with my parents, she came back, she goes, oh my God, you underwrote that woman.
Bill, when did you decide to write your book? You had written many works of reported journalism. Was this something that you sort of always had a feeling that you might come to do? Or what was your journey to writing a memoir finally?
No, it wasn't something I planned to do. I kind of edged into it through an assignment. My first long assignment from the New Yorker in the 80s. It was all kind of, I really backed into it and wrote a piece about surfing. Another guy I surfed with in San Francisco, and that had got a good reception, and my publisher wanted to bring it out as a book. It was in the old days of multi-part pieces. So it was a really big book-length piece, but the main character of the piece hated it. Which is, the piece took me 7 years to write after assignment.
Those were the days.
Yeah, those are the days. But part of my hesitation, I wrote a lot of other stuff, books and pieces during those 7 years, but a lot of my hesitation was the more I reported and knew about this guy, whom I'd surfed with a lot, the more I realized how unpopular he was in this little community where we surfed in San Francisco. And I thought, oh God, you know, what to do with this? How to just like subtly convey that, you know, he wasn't the most loved character in this community. And I knew he would hate it, and indeed he did. And so when my publisher wanted to bring out the long pieces of the book, I said, no. This guy was already in a fury, and so, you know, I don't want to rub his nose in it anymore. This was different to the problem I mentioned earlier we were talking about, in that he was very much sitting for his portrait. Everything was on the record, and he knew it. So it wasn't that kind of problem, but just feeling bad that he was so angry and hurt. So I said no, and in trying to sort of talk my way out of this book, I talked my way into the one I wrote. And in other words, I said, I've surfed with much more interesting people in much more interesting places, started telling that. So of course, it's telling stories, and soon the editor, as always, said, I want that book, you know, write that book. And so it evolved, and then just, but I was often uncomfortable trying to pursue it because the kind of reporting I was doing at the time, especially, which was mainly international and lots of conflict reporting and humanitarian emergencies, these big topics that are self-evidently important, and make you write and on deadline and get it done because you need to tell the world about this. Those pieces were always crowding out this more autobiographical thing. You know, it's got a lot of surfing in it. I mean, who cares? My hobby. And so I would set it aside, go back and forth between the two. And then a few breaks came in the writing and in the reporting of my own life, and made me decide to bear down and finish it.
Did you find it hard to, having written so exclusively about other people, did you find it hard to make that leap into saying my story is important enough for me to tell it?
Yeah, I did, and that would regularly cause me just to set it aside. You know, I just can't stand to write about myself anymore. Although it was easier, much easier writing and more fun than what I normally do, I still would just get sick of myself. And then when I got to I decided to include that San Francisco material in a chapter late in the book about San Francisco and this guy. And it was the hardest chapter to write by far in the book, although it was the one that was already written and fact-checked and edited and like polished to a fairly well. It didn't belong in the book. It sat at a bad angle to the book, and 'cause I needed to make it about me, less a profile. And it was so hard to rake the magazininess and the profileness out of there. It literally took me years. You know, I'm still stuck on the San Francisco chapter, but that's the one you wrote already. Yeah, and it's wrong. I'm trying to place myself at the center of this. And still, I look at that chapter now, I think, I never did get it right, you know. It's still, I mean, it's a sort of break from the me as we watch this other thing unfold.
Right.
But yeah, very hard to justify. You know, you work as a journalist and think what you do is important, and your own little life seems less so, at least for me.
Mishna, what about for you? When you decide, how did you decide that this wasn't just your childhood, this was a memoir? Was it people saying to you, you have to write a book about this, or did you have it in your head earlier on that might be?
No, not at all. I never thought I would write about my family. I never thought they were that interesting. I never thought, it's like everyone else. It's like you just sort of, it's normal to you. I did stand-up comedy for 10 years. And in that time, I never talked about my family on stage at all. Not at all. And I would do these storytelling series because they'd ask stand-ups to come and tell stories, and I'd come and tell stories, and I wouldn't tell stories about my family, like, ever. And then one day I wrote a story about my family, and it was sort of, it just came out kind of fully formed, and very few things do. So, and it was like the one where everyone sort of came up to me, and afterwards, I remember everyone wanted to talk about their family. So they came, I mean, I'm telling you, like 30 people came up to me and told me their life story. And I wrote another story about my family, and then it was like the same thing. Like everyone wanted to talk suddenly, and I felt like that was actually the indicator for me. Is like, I tell a little tidbit from my life and my family, and everyone wants to tell me their life story. That must be how this works. So that was sort of my end, and that chapter never made it into the book. It's like that very first story that came out fully formed is like on an editing, you know, it's gone. It served its purpose.
Did you find it, you know, as Bill's describing, like you had to make yourself sit down to do it, that you were sort of, you had to, you know, give yourself permission to sit down and write it, or did you have less of a struggle with that?
I think that this struggle was, no, because I think it was like very quickly I saw what I was writing about, which was my own personal transformation. So it was like I put together just a list of things I remembered and anecdotes and stuff like that, and it was very clear really quite early on what the thread of them was, which was, you know, sort of my own change in my perspective about my family and where I come from. And then I just sort of sat with them, those memories, and not, I mean, it's not fun for anyone. You know, I figured out pretty early that my embarrassment is very funny to people, and that anything that was like embarrassing and horrible, most people relate to and will enjoy. So that was always my end, and I had been, you know, I found it. I actually, in the process, stopped performing because I realized how much better it was to just sit in a room and deliver it to the paper, and then that goes to the publisher, and then that goes to the store, and then someone picks it up and reads it in the privacy of their. It was like much better for me than being like this, where it's like I'm going to tell you face to face. Like I realized I just don't have to do that anymore. And it was such a relief, actually, in the process. I know, but you know, they don't always.
Alexandra, you wrote your first memoir. You were 29, and now you've written several since, to the point at which, in your most recent memoir, you write about writing your first memoir, the snake is eating its tail.
Yes.
So I wonder whether, you know, Mishna, you were saying that it being several years out from writing the memoir that you know that you've changed from then. And I wonder, Alexandra, if you can talk about sort of revisiting yourself multiple times over the decades, and how your understanding of yourself has changed, and your understanding of yourself through writing about yourself has changed.
You know, what's interesting, I did like I've done light reporting. I would never say I was a reporter or journalist. I feel much more like a writer. I don't sort of, but I would really say for me, memoir is sacred, and that it's the earliest instruction out there. Nosce te ipsum. It's the absolute guarantee to wisdom. Know yourself, nothing else. Once you've got that down, you can go anywhere. And I mean, you realize that I have realized over the course of writing so many memoirs that the only person that guaranteed to be changed by the work is the writer, no one else. And then, you know, to keep taking so many slices at it, for me, it's just this endlessly shifting light. And so much happened. I mean, the snake's eating its tail, but that is because cycles of violence keep recurring. And it's shocking to me that at 48, so many of the patterns that I thought were done when I was 11 have recurred 2 or 3 times in my life. And so for me, you know, Don't Let's Go to Dog's Night was really my childhood with my mother. I had thought I'd written a memoir, and she thought I'd written a biography of her. So that's how that whole thing went down. And then I wrote about going into Mozambique with a soldier from our war. And then I wrote about my mother's childhood because she insisted I got the whole thing wrong. And what I wanted to write in my mother's childhood was her sort of take on growing up in Kenya and just missing the Mau Mau. I mean, a few thousand people died. My mother missed the whole fiasco. I mean, she more or less remembers there was a Mau Mau. But so like being the Greek chorus of saying, how asleep were you? Or how much are you just sort of massaging the narration? And then, you know, again, the divorce was really me looking not at... by the time you're divorced, you've already sort of gone through all the work that you need to go through to ever put it on the paper. But that book was not about divorcing my husband so much as it was about finding out who I was. And the only way I could really feel like I could do that was to go back and look at what my father's influence had been, because I'd focused so much on my mother. And the memoir I'm working on now is my sister's. And that is horrific because we're now adults, and the trauma of that childhood is visited upon our bodies, and you can't unwrite it and stitch it out of your whole being. And, you know, now we're manifesting addiction, and our own parenting is being called into question, and we're middle-aged, and we've both got we're ruined couple of people, much more fun to write about than the edifice of what would have been. But it's a completely different slice, and it's like an MRI, or the light changes, or... Yeah, and I think the thing that you have to bring to it is, you know, love, which is so crazy and so unpopular, and there's nothing objective about it. It's completely subjective and sticky and messy.
What do you mean by love is unpopular?
Well, meaning it gets you into the waters that, you know, are, and I've written for National Geographic, so they make fact-checking at the New Yorker look like a picnic. But this way in which, you know, I'll never forget my editor there saying, it's the upright pronoun that I object to. And I was like, can't you just say first person? Like, really? And that whole, I think, sense of being self-indulgent, that, you know, it needs to be rational and logical and fact-checked and backed up. And what you miss in all of that is all the motivation, all the thing that makes it so that this thing that you ultimately fact-check got started because someone woke up in the morning and had a feeling about something and started a war. And now you can objectively go and fact-check the war, but someone woke up in a really shitty mood and started that thing. And what was it that went back into that? What addiction to power, and what was the thread there? Because for me, if you're just writing memoir, I agree, it's so indulgent. It's just, there's no point. But if you can write all the way through the me in memoir and get to what's universal that you keep talking about, now you have a point. And you have, really, I think, the machine that causes these things that we report as history, as if there is some kind of hands-off, clean, sanitary way of doing. There's nothing sanitary about life. It's a messy, bloody way. And writing is a particularly bloody way to make a living at it. I love the euphemism too, the way. So when I was growing up, there was a minefield between me and Mozambique that the Rhodesians, who were not erudite whatsoever, frowned upon, they didn't think it was, they thought you were, snobby if you spoke French, but they spoke French on this one occasion. Instead of calling it a minefield, they called it a cordon sanitaire. And I feel like that's what they really tried to do to me. They're like, oh, she's coming up, she's mouthy, put a cordon sanitaire around that. Which is, in a way, what I felt like sometimes reporting could be. This way of making it, could you clean that up a bit, mop the passion up, and how can you prove love? Like, what's the fact check behind that feeling?
Bill, you've gone back since writing this book to doing more regular reporting for The New Yorker. Has it changed the way that you do that? Has it changed your reporting practice or your writing or anything like that?
No. No, I don't think so. But it's true that I've always got other sort of first-person stories in the back of my head now, not while I'm writing a profile of somebody. And there's nothing about one's process to dramatize there. So the short answer is no. But I am keen to write another memoir. And
What is your next one going to be about?
It starts out, I was, for a few years, I worked as a brakeman on the railroad here in California, Southern Pacific as it then was. A job I really loved, and it was kind of a world that
And my 4-year-old would really like to meet you.
Yeah, yeah, all trained fans. And that world's kind of vanished now, but I think it's quite a rich story. Both it was the language of it. I mean, I have notebooks that are just full of sort of railroad dialect, but I've realized over time that period, this is the late 70s, is rich in a number of ways, and so I'm hoping to write this with some journalistic justification, I suppose. I mean, I can make an argument about railroads and labor and other political issues, but really it's personal, and it's partly from having discovered the pleasure and how much relative success one can have. I've written a bunch of journalistic books that really got less attention than this book about my hobby. So big serious books. But
Yeah.
The other thing, Bill, that you write about having written in your memoir is fiction. And throughout the memoir, you're writing novels, including one about the railroad, right?
Yep.
So I wondered if you could talk, and then Alexandra and Mishna too, about how you feel, is there a kind of hierarchy in your soul between fiction and non-fiction, fiction and memoir? Has that changed over time? Your aspirations to being a novelist, have they gone away, or have they been replaced by insatisfaction in terms of doing what you wanted to do as a writer, as a memoirist?
Yeah, they have. I was a fiction writer, also unpublished. Wrote several novels when I was young, and I went through a sort of transformation as a writer through one of the many day jobs I had. This after railroading, I was teaching high school in Cape Town, outside Cape Town. This is in the bad old days of apartheid, and it was a very intense year in these townships where I worked, and students went out on strike for a few months, and big conflict with the state as the sort of liberation struggle there was escalating. And it was just so intense to be there. I was finishing up that railroad novel, and it began to feel increasingly sort of artsy and so what? I mean, some of my students and colleagues and other people I knew in the township I admired so much, and their seriousness and kind of idealism and grounded view of things was so moving to me. It was just, I realized by the end of that year I'd really lost interest in doing the kind of artsy fiction I was doing, and wanted to write about politics and power. And I started reading, I don't know what you want to call it, literary nonfiction, you know, long-form nonfiction where the writing was strikingly good, and realizing that there was sort of literature to be made there, and fell under the sway of several old New Yorker writers, some of them no longer with us, some of them still around, whose stuff I loved, and my compass really adjusted, and sort of stays adjusted. I mean, I read a lot of fiction. I love to read fiction, but I feel like I lost that belief that I can, you know, conjure a world not based on fact and persuade my readers. I mean, I've tried a couple times, but I feel like I've lost that self-belief and can only do it in a world based on fact.
Alexandra, you've most recently published a novel, so you did go back, or maybe persisted in doing it throughout. What's been the what was the difference in doing that for you? What was that experience like?
Oh God, chiefly my family didn't want to kill me. It was great. I think that for me, it's not, if the thing that I want to say happens to present itself because I've lived that life, then good, I will put it in the body of a memoir. And I happen to be very interested right now in PTSD and addiction, and the ways in which at middle age, I think that there really is a sort of comeuppance that I think one is vaguely aware of, but you don't realize till you get there. God, it's this exquisite thing. That's what they mean about revelations. It's the thing as it really is. Suddenly all that sort of exuberance of youth and the way that you thought you could boulder your way through it disappears. So for me, that is why I'm back to nonfiction. But for me, fiction was another way of telling a truth that was not mine to tell. And I, especially because I was writing about, you know, the Lakota, for me, this is... It would I would talk about, listen, maybe because I went to boarding school, I can't see a rule without violating it, but this even violated all my own rules, and yet that was the thing I woke up every single day thinking about, was the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and everyone I knew out there. And after I'd woken up for 4 years, and it was my first thought at 4:30 in the morning, I started to put together a book that I had reported as you know, I'd reported the whole thing. And so there was nothing in the book that I had to make up. And that is what I realized, that having, so I guess, lent so hard into nonfiction, if I treated fiction the way I had nonfiction, it all worked out better. And the best part was you didn't have to go through fact-checking. It was great. It was like writing nonfiction, but without fact-checking department. Really win-win. But I found I had to cleave quite closely to the same principles, because otherwise, like, that's how I mean, for me, writing, so much of it is about what's the architecture of this thing. Once that structure exists, then you can start throwing words in there. But the architecture for me needed to feel non-fiction-y.
Mishna, your memoir reads like a novel. I mean, it feels like
I appreciate that.
It feels like a story that that has been...
I haven't read it in a while, I'm not going to lie, since I wrote it, actually. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of very vivid details in there, and there's also a lot of like just interstitial stuff tying it together that is recreated conversations and this and that and the other thing. I've found, I also have a screenwriting career. I have found through screenwriting a whole new level of satisfaction in storytelling that I really enjoy. I have a novel on my desktop. I've decided it's not important this week, but you know, next week I may find the angle on it that suddenly makes it important again. I don't know. I've given myself a lot of latitude since I'm Down came out to sort of explore my passions. And like, you know, I got into screenwriting because I read all these stories about Cuban baseball players being smuggled into the U.S. and like was like, I'm going to write a screenplay, and that screenplay went to it went around, and people, it was very genre, and I was like, and I'm going to write it like Sam Peckinpah, because I love Sam Peckinpah, and next thing I know, I'm walking around Hollywood with a Mexican road movie. I have unfortunately not specialized in anything, but I really enjoy my storytelling career, and I have, been involved with a TV project around my own book, and I just feel like a story is a story is a story, and when you have a real true story, there are these things that hang in the air that are these connective tissues that make the arc of a story, and you're like, that's a story. And when you've got 2 out of 3 and it's not a story. You can fictionalize it if you need to, but that's not a story. And I feel like just that, and my husband, who's also a writer, we have this game we play around the table, like, that's a book, that's a 1-act. Yeah, that's nothing. That's a TV show. That's a screenplay. That's a play. That's a sketch.
I like your motto. A story is a story is a story. Somehow that's got all 3, right?
Yeah.
You say it 3 times and you've got it. Somehow that. My concerns or my sort of commitments in terms of genre.
Yeah.
Fiction versus nonfiction kind of dissolve as I hear you say that.
Yeah.
I suddenly see that perhaps I've been seeing this the wrong way.
I feel like you can really tell when a story has legs. When for me, it's always when there's someone who starts out here, events happen, and they wind up there. And the difference between here and there is between their ears. And that's how I knew I had a memoir. And it's why I have tabled another memoir that I'm like, the world doesn't need this memoir. It's going to sit on my desktop.
God, I think that every time I write. Oh, man, that's just...
it's like, but I also trust that later, if I'm writing it, maybe it'll take 10 years, maybe 20 years, the thing that will come to me where I realize why I wrote that stuff in the first place, and I'm not just going to send stuff out in the world because I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like that point of view element, like when I started my memoir, I had a very strong point of view of my childhood that I realized that I always thought, which was, if I was a better kid, if I was better at being cool in the Black community, my dad would love me. And that was my perspective through my memoir, and that was my perspective through my childhood, and I realized there was a point in my life at which that changed into, oh, that's just who he is. It's not personal, and that shift was what gave me the freedom to walk out into a life and not be, forever dragging his disapproval around with me.
Well, dragging his disapproval around with you to the extent that you gave you a book to write.
Yeah, well,
too,
yeah.
So there's
Thanks,
that.
Dad.
We've only got a couple of minutes, so I want to just have all of you tell me what memoirs have inspired you. What are you readers of memoirs? Are there ones that you would urge our audience to read?
Michael
for themselves?
Ondaatje's Running in the Family. There's nothing better. And that I read 3 memoirs, and I in one go. When you just pack the right books for your vacation, and it was brilliant. It was Michael Ondaatje's Running in the Family. It was Mary Carr's The Liars Club.
That's a great one.
And and then James Galvin's The Meadow, which he wrote as a novel, but it wasn't. And I thought, the trick in it there was no victim in the book. And I thought, right, if you get out of that story and you actually make it, if you just put the thing down, it's self-evident to the reader that this was a far from ideal situation, and you can be hilarious about it. That's it, right? Comedy, tragedy plus time plus, one of you's like, all right, I'll write it. I'll be the one.
Bill, do you have Sorry, or Mishna,
No,
go.
no,
Which
sorry.
either?
The one that really inspired me, because I feel like an outsider to the world of literature, was Iceberg Slim's Pimp, which I read numerous times, and that wasn't. Anyways, he's an outsider, but he writes in a really natural voice, and it's a really easy read, and it was the sort of #1 requested book in prison. Pimp.
Pimp by Iceberg Slim.
Bill, you've got
love
10 seconds.
Maybe the first half of Burning the Days by James Salter, or the first 2/3 before he becomes a writer and it gets flabby. But I loved that book, and at first modeled my book after it.
All right, wonderful.
Burning the Days by James Salter.
All right, well,
Did you read it?
I haven't. I'm going to.
I think we're finished. Thank you.
France.
They're off having their conversation, but
Exciting.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.